Order.
Councillor Wyman.
Here.
Councillor Matthew.
Here.
Councillor Larson.
Here.
Councillor Kuechly.
Here.
Mayor Swanson.
Here. Report from department heads. Nobody from Public Works. Nobody from Ambulance. Engineering. Attorney.
The only comments I have, I'll reserve for when the refunding discussion comes.
All right. Planning and zoning.
Not till July.
Recreation board. Library board. Nothing to report at this time. BETA, end of the month.
Wednesday.
Annual sheriff. Boy, we got through that fast. Council's addition to the agenda, we have to add something to our payables here, it looks like. A small amount. That looks like it's about it.
Darn post office, huh?
I know. Yeah. All right. Citizens forum? Nobody for that. Consent agenda.
Do we have to have two separate motions on this? Or can we?
I think you can approve them as long as you mention both of them on one.
I'll make the motion to approve the council minutes of the regular city council meeting and the special city council meeting of June 2nd and June 9th.
3 times real fast.
Support.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. Claims?
I'll make a motion to accept the claims for pay period number 12 and also an extra $4.13 in the claims to the Buhl post office.
I'll support.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. On to business. We have our annual audit review. Welcome, Bonnie.
Step these aside for a moment here.
Uh-oh.
You're already too late, Ted. We buzzed right through
Oh,
it.
did you?
Yes. Did you have something you needed to report?
Did you
Yes, eventually.
want to do that first?
Would you be all right with that, Bonnie? Because we're going through our annual audit review.
Oh, okay.
So if you-
Thank you. Sorry about that.
As long as you're not asking for money, we'll listen to you.
All right, well, you can go back up here then. Hi, I just got off the phone with Josh. It was short notice, sorry I came up so late. We are actually looking for some. We were gonna put the new hall out on bids for painting. There's enough of us that are willing to do it. We're just asking for some money to buy the paint ourselves and do it. We're trying to go for like $400 to buy the paint.
Paint the fire hall?
Yep.
Okay.
Is 400 enough, or do you want to have a little bit bigger?
Can I get a bump to 5?
Yeah, I have no problem with that.
Paint's on sale right now. That's right where it was earlier today, so.
We have a motion.
I'll make a motion, we allow the fire department to get paint up the cost of $500 to paint the new fire hall.
Support.
Any further discussion? All in
Just-
favor? Yes?
Just one thing to do. Is this coming out of fire, half ambulance, or?
I'm gonna say right now, but I'll have Josh answer that, but I'm gonna say right now it's probably gonna come out of both half.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried.
And then one other thing that I think I have is that we are talking about hydrants. We're gonna try to get those painted this year yet. Hopefully between Trent, us, we're gonna be asking for some volunteers going around and color coding them due to the pressure that's coming out of them. So any department showing up, we can say, go find a green hydrant. They'll find a green hydrant, they'll know what the PSI rating is on it right away, or
Good.
gallons per minute. So that's another item we're going after. Big thank you to the city crew, much brighter over there at the hall. They did get the lights changed, you can
Oh,
tell a
good.
huge
Sound
difference over there.
Good.
And we are working with Trent on getting the ball field cleaned up. Him and I were texting quite a bit yesterday and getting that tall grass on the fence line down, so.
Good.
Appreciate it. Any questions for me? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ted.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. Okay. Bonnie?
Okay. Well, Mayor and member of the council, I'm Bonnie, and I'm one of the partners with the audit firm of Sterling Company, and we conducted the City of Buhl's 2004 audit. You should have the packet in front of you. It's a 60 plus or 68-plus page report, and I'm just going to take a few highlights tonight. Feel free, if you have any questions as we're going through it, to ask. First, if you flip in 2 or 3 pages, you'll come to the independent auditor's report. And once again, I'm pleased to inform you that the City of Buhl received an unmodified opinion or report. Same thing that you had received last year. Flipping to pages 3 through 14, that's called the management discussion and analysis. That's prepared by your management staff. It has some narratives in there and pulls numbers from the financial reports. So you could go ahead and read that. It might be a little easier than digging further into the financial report itself. The one thing I'd like you to do is flip to page 12 within the management and discussion. And just to highlight a few things, you did incur or did spend almost $700,000 this last year in 2014 on capital improvements. A lot of that was done with some IRRB funding or some CDBG and some street work. So there is a little synopsis within your MD&A that talks about some of the improvements that the city did. If you go on and flip to pages 15 to 18, we talked about GASB 34 in the past in the presentation. 15 to 18 are the citywide financial statements. Those are presented on the full accrual basis, and so it includes all your debt funding, OPEB requirements, the accrual for your compensated absences. So if you flip to page 16, and what happens with the government-wide is it's actually split. We don't, the city doesn't report on individual fund basis. It reports on governmental activities and your business type activities. So for the year of 2014, the third column over towards the very bottom, you can see the City of Buhl ended 2014 with a little over 9.7, almost 9.8 million in a positive net position. We're going to get into some more detail in the fund-based statements. It's probably what you're more familiar in seeing on a month-to-month basis, and those start on page 19. That's where I want to spend a little bit of time on page 19. Shows your balance sheet for your governmental funds. You've got, the City of Buhl has 5 major funds. Those are determined based on formulas in accordance with government standards. And you'll notice on your general fund, which is the first column, towards the bottom, we've talked about this in the past, that the City of Buhl has $1,080,933,000 in an unassigned fund balance in your general fund. We've said in the past that a rule of thumb is anywhere from 4 to 6 months of operating expenses. Right now, Buhl in your general fund as of the end of the year had almost 17 and a half months in your general fund. So you have a healthy fund balance in your general fund.
Bonnie, is that a problem for any reason?
It can be. In the past, the state auditor sometimes has sent out correspondence to cities saying, if you have a higher fund balance, what's your plan for it? Are you committing some of that? Are you saving for different plans or futures you may want to look at? How are you going to be planning on using those general fund dollars in the past?
You remember all through these years, I think we've had the same thing every year.
Mm-hmm.
We've been way over, yeah.
Yeah, and we have never received a letter from anybody or.
A lot of times you'll see when we get into the enterprise funds, it's the other way. Your fund balances aren't quite as healthy in those funds, but in your general fund, you do have significantly higher than the rule of thumb.
Okay.
In your administrative and your capital projects fund, you'll also see that you've got a little over almost 1.7 million. Now that is your fund that the council has committed those funds for projects. You've set aside, you've done council motions that they are going to be committed towards either future capital projects, or they're set aside for the rec department, or they're set aside for street. The large amount of that 1.7 at the end of the year included almost $958,000 that the city had committed for the completion of your kids' piece or the Martin Hughes School project. So within your administrative capital fund, that leaves just a little over $770,000 that's been committed. Stubler Pit, we've also talked about that every year. It's considered a major fund because it is showing a deficit fund balance of $273,000. That was created several years ago when you did your improvements out at Stubler Pit, and at that point, the city had decided to, when you had done the improvements for the infrastructure, there was a temporary borrowing from the general fund for about $98,000, and the rest of it, which is part of that $273,000, is anticipated to be paid down once you sell lots. That might be something that the council might want to revisit and look at. There hasn't been any activity in that fund for the last couple of years, but that right now is still sitting at a deficit at $273,000. France Street is your other major fund in 2014, and that one was almost complete at the end of 2014. According to the engineer's estimate, it was about 95% complete. Part of that included water and sewer upgrades, and so you'll see on the next page when we get to that, part of those costs were transferred over to the water and sewer funds respectively. So there is a deficit in that fund of $106,000, but according to discussions with management and staff, it's anticipated that once those projects were completed now in 2015, that those funds would be transferred if there was any deficit from some dollars that have been designated in your administrative capital projects fund. And then the final one, your final other major fund is your kids' piece, or your Martin Hughes School project that was started. That's also showing a deficit at the end of 2014, but the council had a discussion and had determined at that point, if you remember, that you were going to wait until the project was complete, and then you'll make a motion to transfer those designated, or excuse me, those committed dollars that are over in your administrative capital funds that you had set aside of almost $958 to cover the majority of that. The other column, your total other non-major funds. There's another 16 funds that the City of Buhl has. The City of Buhl has 21 governmental funds. Those are found in the latter part of your report in pages 48 to 50. And I won't go through each of those in detail, but you'll find that back there. So overall, your total governmental funds have a total fund balance of $2,463,000. Then you'll see a column called component unit, and that's you're required to include BETA. That's BETA's activity gets included in your financial reports. If you flip to page 21, that'll show your statement of revenues and expenditures and changes in fund balance for 2014. Again, for those 5 major funds, and then your other non-major earned total. A couple things to just highlight there is, again, under the general fund, you'll see a transfer out towards the bottom of the page of $182,718. That was in relation to when the council made the motion of establishing your internal service fund for your some of your retiree benefits, and we'll get to that in a moment. So that was the motion when some of those accumulated funds that had been built up and maintained in your general fund were approved for transfer over to the internal service fund. And then again, a couple things under the France Street South Capital Projects Fund. Again, there's a transfer out of $113,000. That's, remember, whenever you do a project in your capital projects fund and you're doing a street project, a lot of that at the same time you're doing water and sewer infrastructure improvements at the same time. We talk with your engineer and get the estimate of the split. Those costs do get recorded over into your water and sewer, so they're appropriately picked up as capital assets and depreciated. So that $113,000 was the portion that related, the estimated portion, to your water and sewer portion. Any questions so far on some of those major funds?
don't think so.
Then I'm gonna kind of flip you to page 25. These are your enterprise funds. These we've also spent a little time in the past talking about. The enterprise funds are different than your governmental or your governmental funds in the fact that your enterprise funds should be covered by user fees. So we're always looking at that line called operating income and expense, or operating income and loss, excuse me, right in the middle of that page. Ambulance had a positive 24,368. They traditionally, their fees have been more than enough to cover the operations of the ambulance. Water is showing an operating loss for 2014 of 32,729. If you go up in that column, you'll see depreciation is 45,000. So we've talked about your utility fees are not adequate to cover your operating costs, including depreciation. And it's recommended that that occurs. So when you need to do infrastructure improvements or putting in water lines, you've got some funds available to that.
So you're talking we gotta raise rates?
Well, the numbers,
Yeah.
the other thing though in the water fund I want to bring out is you'll also see that your repairs and maintenance were 34,000 for 2014. This last year we saw a lot of cities incurring frozen water lines, and so there were significant breaks. So some of that water loss for 2014 is attributed to some of those perhaps unusual expenditures. So, it necessarily doesn't mean that you'll consistently be looking at a $32,000 loss, but it is something to consider. My understanding talking with Mike when I was on site doing is that he has been currently looking at rate structures. And so this does point to the fact that the city does need to look at where you're going, because your rate structure should cover your depreciation.
Right.
It's a struggle a lot of smaller cities have because you have a limited amount of users to spread the costs over. So it's a struggle, but it is recommended. Sewer fund, you'll see a similar situation. Sewer lost 56,000 for 2014. Again, that's almost parallel to exact what depreciation was, of 56,000.
And why was there that kind of depreciation on a brand-new system?
That the dollar amount, you mean 56,000?
Yeah, yes.
What happens, and I've got details, I can get you the list, and I've provided it with Diana, but it's spread over the amount of projects that you would put in over, anywhere from 25 to 45 years assigned to it. And so it does add up.
Okay.
And especially when we flip back to just one page, I didn't highlight it, but on page 24, you'll see some of the assets that you have. Now, this is already net of depreciation, but you can see you've got 2.6 million in assets in those funds alone. So that's being depreciated. And I think this has been pretty consistent. It usually runs about 40,000 to 50,000 for those funds. Refuse, also if you keep moving at a loss. Smaller, 8,314. So that's, and there is no depreciation because you don't have the assets into that when you're contracting out. And then electric does traditionally show a positive. It was positive of almost 9,000. And that is with depreciation. And that's been a trend. Your electric fund tends to, your utility rates tend to cover that portion. So you might want to look at looking at how you set those rate structures as a whole for those individual utility systems as well. The other thing under the sewer, before I move on to the internal service, you'll see a special item towards the bottom. A loss on the disposal of 638,000. That's considered a special item. That was when the city had demolished the building and some of the structure that was out at the old sewer plant. It's considered a special item because although it's within the control of the council, it's an unusual, it's not something that's gonna occur. What that was the basis left of your original cost less what it had been depreciated up until that point. So it wasn't, in all purposes, your book value left. And so what happens when that gets demolished, gets written off your books, and you end up recognizing a loss. So even though a change in net positions for the sewer fund shows 658, you really can temper that because of that one-time book loss, really, what it is.
Question for you, on this depreciation, does the state of Minnesota set the percentages for depreciation, or who does this?
The city itself. If you remember right, and maybe you weren't on there, depreciation is set by what the council looks at. Oftentimes it's, right now your policy says you're doing a straight line method. The city itself has assigned estimated lives for asset values. And this was probably established when GASB 34 came out back in 2000 something. And so the city at that point set a policy. You're required to depreciate. You're required to actually process and do depreciation, calculate it, but the terms of how you set it is an individual citywide policy. And so, and of course, we as auditors look at what's reasonable. You know, if you would buy a building, or if you would put up a building and say, well, we're gonna write that building off over 5 years, we may say that's not really reasonable because it's estimated to last more than that. But you look at putting in water and sewer lines, and I don't have the information right in front of me on what the actual years that you've assigned, but that is a city policy.
Okay.
Any questions on that sewer disposal, the special item on that one? The other thing on that page is what the very last column to your right is the internal service fund. That's new for those of you that are familiar with these financial statements. That's new. The city had approved back in 2014 to establish what they call it, an internal service fund, and that was to account for all your post-employment or retirement benefits, the OPEB, so to speak. Before, what had happened is the city had funds set aside in the general fund, you had funds set aside in your water and sewer, and because of the nature of your employees, they're working in all different funds, that the council had established what they call an internal service fund. And so you'll see that column over. You'll see charges for services showing a little over 64,000. That actually is made up of 60,000 comes from transfers from your water and sewer. Those were accumulated benefits in your OPEB, so you won't see that every year. The net effect is 4,709. That is what you actually get from your retirees. So this fund in the future, you'll be able to look at that, say, what do the retirees pay for their share? What do we as a city pay out for those continuing health benefits? And so way down in the bottom, you'll see the net position for your internal service. You are showing 261,000, and that the city did open up a separate savings account dedicated, committed to that. So right now you're showing 261,000. The city has committed those funds to fund those post-employment healthcare benefits. Interesting enough, when you go back into footnote 16 and we start talking about OPEB and some estimations of what your actuarial accrued liability is sitting on about 325,000. So even though you're not required to fund it, currently the city of Buhl has set aside almost 80% of it. So you're being very proactive in covering those health benefits. The other thing, other movement that has been done within the city in the last few years is you've changed your contracts, and so some of the new employees coming on aren't eligible for those type of benefits. You fund HSAs and different things instead. So all of that helps reduce that future liability that's out there. Any questions on that? I think the big thing to probably highlight are that line for operating income and loss for each of those when you're looking ahead at and what are appropriate rates for the future for those funds. The rest of it I'm going to go through fairly quick. Footnotes, there's a many pages of footnotes. On page 34, footnote 3 talks about your interfund receivables, payables. A lot of those are, you'll see that general fund has that $97,933. That's actually from your Studler pit. We had talked about that earlier. The remaining amount of those dollar amounts are, you'll notice Kids Peace Brown Street, we talked about those are projects that you've been operating, they're showing deficit cash right now, temporarily borrowed from your capital administration, and then the intent is to pay that back once those projects were complete. And then page 36, again, we talk about that special item, the disposal of your asset. Page 37 is your long-term debt. Right now, currently, you have just one general obligation refunding bond issuance out there. You'll see it's split between your governmental and your business type, and then you also have an equipment installment agreement for a piece of equipment that was bought back in 2013. So overall, right at least by the end of 2014, the city had debt of about $251,000. And so we also show your annual requirements to amortize that over the next 5 years. So you'll see for 2015, you have a debt service cost of a little over $58,000 required to service that debt. Flipping back then, I'd already talked about pages 48 to 53 are all the detail for your non-major funds. A lot of that should be fairly descriptive when you look at the activity the city of Buhl has. Tends to set up, every time you do a project, you'll set up a capital projects fund, so it should be fairly clear where the funding sources come from that. Just flip to page 67 are the two findings. If you've been on the council for a while, they look very familiar, and they are there. Very common amongst cities of similar size. Finding 2014-01 is your lack of segregation of duties. You have staff that have the ability to record, reconcile, report, and so we look at that as auditors as a control deficiency, and it just merits attention from the council to ask questions, to approve the disbursements, looking at the financial. We do talk to the staff and say it's a good thing when the council comes in and asks questions, they're doing their job. So we just recommend that you be aware of that and that you set the appropriate oversight that you deem necessary. Finding 02 is one that's required. It came out about 3 or 4 years ago that we're also required to put in as a control deficiency because we assist the city as a non-attest engagement to prepare your financial statements. Typically, it's a responsibility of management to prepare that book, but most cities do contract out with firms to prepare it on a cost-benefit analysis. And then the very last page is your Minnesota legal compliance. And again, I'm happy to report there were, based on the tests that were conducted, we're required to test 7 different categories, which include contracting and bidding, deposits and investments, conflict of interest, public indebtedness, claims and disbursements, and some miscellaneous provisions. And based on the testing, there were no compliance issues. That takes care of the bound report. There's a lot more into it. I am going to go into it. We have a meeting with Diana the first part of July to get into a lot of the more nitty-gritty of that. So if anybody else would like to have that, get into that, please let me know. I am also required to briefly, you should have received 2 other letters. Yes. One is called the letter to those in charge of governance. It doesn't have a cover sheet to it. It's a required communication. As an auditor, I need to verify that you all received it. It's very standard, looks familiar from what you had before. So I'm not going to go into any more detail, but we are required to disclose what's in there. And then just a couple things on the management letter. To be aware of, we have a couple things coming down the pipeline. GASBs. We spent a lot of time with GASB 34, and then if you remember right, there's GASB 54 that dealt with fund balances and net assets.
Could
Now
you tell
we-
us what that acronym stands for?
GASB, certainly, Governmental Accounting Standards Board. And so it's the standards board that sets some uniformity and guidelines and standards for city financial reporting. And it provides uniformity for everybody. And in order to get clean audit opinions, cities need to comply with this. Unfortunately, the city of Buhl needs to play by the same rules as larger cities. There is some talk about maybe establishing what they call big gap, little gap, a couple, to alleviate some of the standards overload and the requirements for cities your size to comply. That is not in the works right now, so your standards and statements have to follow GASB. So one of the things, GASB 67 and 68 are coming out. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail on what that is tonight, other than to let you know there are some considerations. I'm going to meet with Diana to go with it. It's again talking about the pensions. If you remember when OPEB came out, GASB 45 and all the stuff you had to do, 67 applies to the pension plans and 68 applies to cities, which is now for 2015. Para, you have some pension funding with Para. We'll be sending you data that will get incorporated into your financial statements, primarily your footnotes, some disclosure. It's not, you're still gonna have a pay-as-you-go with Para that you'll still submit when somebody retires and they're gonna be drawing off their pension off Para. You're still funding it under what we call a pay-as-you-go. That's not gonna change. Some reporting standards are. The management letter talks about the impact of GASB 67 and 68 in relation to your Buhl Relief Association, because that is going to be part of it also. I have an additional handout I'll leave with Diana here that kind of, it's put out from the league, it's a little bit easier lay terminology, and the city will have to, or we'd recommend the city review that to determine whether you need to have an actuarial study look at what's happening in your relief associations. Right now, your relief association will calculate their accrued liability based on state statutes. They go through, they will be coming now in about August 1st, they'll certify to your clerk the municipal contribution that the city of Buhl needs to kick into your relief associations. That whole thing is calculated based on statutes, and what they're saying is they're not in compliance with GASB standards, and so in order to see the difference, you may have to have an actuarial report to do that. So I've got some additional information to talk about that, and might be something that the council may need to address sometime in the near future. And then just a couple other quick considerations. We've talked about committed funds. This was a point last year we talked about too. Just a little cleanup language technically under GASB 54. The committed funds, that's what the council has set aside. You've made the direction, for instance, when you set aside the funds for the Martin Hughes School, those are committed. They're put in place, designated, so to speak, from the council. Those should be reiterated every year and documented in your minutes. You don't have to do the dollar amounts, those can come through the audit process, but should go through every year and document that. Your administrative, your 401 fund is committed, and the list that you have onto it. You do it through your budgeting process, but it should be clearly set out in your minutes. So just a reminder to clarify that. Talked about enterprise fund operating losses. Be very considerate of where that's at for 2014. And again, just a reiteration of the significant deficiencies for the lack of segregation of duties and the fact that we prepare the financial reports. Is there any other questions? There's a lot of information in there, and I invite any of you, if you do have specific questions or want to get into anything further, feel free to call.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Is there any other questions?
At least we're not in trouble, so.
Well, according to what I audit, I can't tell you you're not in trouble for anything other than what I've done in here. I guess that would be a legal question to your attorney. But there were no, you had a clean audit opinion, and there were no legal compliance. If there were any, the couple points would be to really look at what your utility rates are where you're sitting with those. Those would be probably a higher concern to look at. And then, as the mayor had indicated, perhaps coming up with a plan for where you're sitting with your general fund.
Thank you, Bonnie. Good job.
Thank you.
Very good.
All right, we'll move on to Resolution 1523, a resolution approving the issuance and sale of the nursing home revenue refunding note, Series 2015, Forest Health Services. Discussion?
Madam Mayor, I just wanted to, I'm sorry.
They're here to discuss it on the nursing home's behalf. You have
Right.
information for us?
I just wanted to let the council know that I've reviewed all the documents, the transactional documents, which include the memo of bond counsel, the extract of the minutes, the resolution approving the refunding note, Resolution 1523, the notice of call for redemption of the 2003 A bonds, the refunding note itself, the assignment agreement, the loan agreement between the city and Forest Health, and the IRRB guarantee. I believe, at least in my opinion, that the interests of the city are adequately protected.
Okay.
So Mayor and members of the council, I'm Nick Scarridge with Doherty Funding, and we're here tonight to get that resolution passed on behalf of Cornerstone. And similar to the original 2003 bonds, there was two series that were issued, the A's and the B's. The B's were simply a taxable component that were paid off right away. So all that's outstanding is the 2003 A's. And similar to that transaction, the city acts as issuer of the debt. You are not liable for that debt. You don't own or operate the facility. Should the facility not be able to make their payments in the future, you are not liable to make those payments. You're not liable to levy taxes for those payments. It's really a statutory formality in the process. You're what's called a conduit issuer. A nonprofit cannot issue tax-exempt debt on its own, or borrow tax-exempt on its own behalf. They can borrow taxable, but they can't borrow tax-exempt. In order to do that, you need a governmental issuer, and that applies to everybody in the country. So in a typical case, it's your local unit of government, might be your EDA, your HRA, might be the county, but in this case, it made perfect sense originally, and now to have it be the city of Buhl. And so basically that tax exemption flows through the conduit to the borrower. So Doherty Funding is the lender on the transaction, Cornerstone and Forest Health Services is the borrower, and you're call it the go-between from a statutory standpoint. But again, you'll probably hear very little on the transaction moving forward, but you are the conduit to get that tax exemption from the city to Cornerstone.
So we're just the go-between, so you got
This is not city.
a channel to work through.
Right.
Yeah.
Any questions?
I like, I have no problem with this whatsoever, but I'd like for us to be updated
Sure.
of how this is going, if you get a hold of Mike, and
Sure.
so we know. I'd appreciate it.
And of course, as I think was discussed a council meeting or two ago, there'll be a pilot payment that goes into effect. I believe it's January 1st of 2018.
Right.
Right.
We'll receive $10,000 a year for the term of, at least, I don't know, was the term of the note, or was it for
In lieu of taxes?
indefinitely? Okay, so.
Yes.
I'll make a motion that we adopt resolution 1523.
Support.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Can we have the roll call?
Counselor Lehman?
Yes.
Counselor Matthew?
Yes.
Counselor Larson?
Yes.
Counselor Keithley?
Yes.
Mayor Swanson?
Yes. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. Good luck. Next piece of business we have, well, John Jamnich is going to be coming. I guess this is just kind of an FYI for everybody. He wants to do a little bit more research before he...
He couldn't make it tonight, so.
We just wanted a little bit more time to
Yeah.
look at things too. But if I could just add a little something
ma'am.
here. We did have somebody go take a look at the roof. The people that had done it, the company that did it the last time, plus the architect. They're saying that the roof is not leaking.
Really?
And Well, but the attic is extremely wet. And we're not too sure where that's coming from right now. None of us are brave enough to go into that little area to see where it's all coming from. Trent went up there, took a look around as best he could. But we're hoping to get maybe a camera up there to kind of see where the points are, where it is leaking into. So that's kind of where we're sitting right now with that.
Do we need to contract somebody to actually go up in there and assess where this is coming from?
Let's see if we can get a camera up there first before we do
Okay.
that.
Where would the water be coming from the attics? I don't know. Tell you the-
I have heard that it could be coming from, if you look up there, there's that little house deal thing that's sitting up there kind of in the middle. It might be leaking through there and going straight down into the basement where it kind of does flow to.
Of course, water could be coming from any place.
If it's water, we had suspected it was
Yeah, a lot of-
oil based.
There's a lot of oil.
Yeah, that's strange. Remember, we looked that day on the floor upstairs,
Yeah.
and it does, you feel with your fingers.
And
it's
I
oil,
thought
yeah.
it was the flooring itself maybe giving,
That came from up above. Unless it's something from the sides.
There's that too, and other people have talked about that, so.
Yeah.
But, maybe if we can get this camera up here fairly quickly, I'll
Okay,
report back to you
can
guys.
report back at our next meeting
Yeah.
and we'll get something done about it.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you, Mike. Park and Recreation requesting 2 checks for $300 each from the event fund for the 4th of July and for the beach blast.
I'll make a motion, we give them 2 checks for $300 for the 4th of July activities and the beach blast.
Support.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. Now, the Grahams have a request, maybe?
Maybe, yeah, they just kind of caught me when I was out in the alley there, but they were thinking of putting up a fence in their yard, which is right over here.
Right.
And they would like to have the fence, if they ever do it, to put it right to the building here.
Well, that would mean a variance then, huh?
That would be planning and zoning then, long-range planning and zoning.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
If they come up and ask about it again or whatever,
Well,
we can always
I'll
call a
bring it to
special
planning
meeting.
zone.
Yes, we can. Yes.
and
Okay,
take care of it.
okay.
All right.
Did,
Sergeant McKenzie, did you have anything?
I did. Oh, I do. The squad car has been fixed and has been returned and looks good, works well, everything's fine. And there was a burglary this morning at the Hideaway Bar of Buhl, kind of late in the morning, actually 7:45. And actually reported at 9 minutes to 8. And the party was in custody at 7 minutes after 8. And there was a little bit of luck involved, but he's in custody and we've got our evidence and so, anyway. And then the last meeting, I brought up the issue of the curfew, and I didn't get much of a read from the council on if anybody wants to proceed with any kind of information about that.
I don't really see a need for it, to tell you the truth. I think that would be hard to enforce. I think about the time you send them home and go around the next block, they'd be back out if they wanted to.
Well, that's,
And the damage before, it'd be, if they're gonna cause trouble, 10 o'clock works as well as midnight, don't you think?
well, I don't know about curfew hours, I haven't studied it to that extent, but I think that it would be a wise thing to have some sort of mechanism to enforce the curfew and to keep people, young people, off the streets. I think there should be a way to do that, and obviously many times we don't need statutes for murder and robbery and assault, but when we have them, when we need them, we've got them.
So,
I don't think it wouldn't be too bad of an idea.
Could we look into some other towns, Mike,
Sure.
and see what they have? Just for a setup and
Sure.
and see how it's working with other towns?
Yeah,
I think I mentioned at the last meeting that Duluth PD in '09 went back and reinvigorated their curfew ordinance because it's in response to their problems and they saw a need for it. And of course, there was a need for it back when it was created. I mean, a lot of these laws were created by a need, so.
Right.
Do you think that would create a problem though, Pat, being that it's not 24/7 coverage?
No.
I mean, you could have an officer on duty here 3 nights or 4 nights during the week, but the other 3 nights then they're...
Right, but the, if there's a call, somebody's gonna respond, and, then action could be taken. I think that to simply send kids home or give them a warning just doesn't work in many cases. So I think, there's discretion involved, and obviously there are times when a warning is appropriate and a better choice. But there are also times, we'll say repeat offenders, when a piece of paper has an effect. So I think that it's something we should consider.
Do you have a time, like certain time at night that you would rec?
Well, I looked at the Duluth PD or the Duluth City curfew, and I don't have that, but I think it was broken down by ages. I think it was 15 had to be in by 10 and 17 home by 12, or I'm not sure about that. But
That could be
you couldn't make it a blanket curfew because there are kids that work, for instance, at McDonald's until midnight and that sort of thing. So, and like I said, there's discretion involved in most everything we do. So,
What would be the difference from like now not having it if we did call and a complaint? You'd come and do...
well,
what
it
you do now?
depends what the complaint is. Depends what kind of contact is made, what kind of contact it turns into, and like I say, you could warn somebody, send them home, tell them to go home, and but we can't tell someone to go home.
Well, and if they're not breaking the law, do you need to tell them to go home?
Yeah, but if they're outside bouncing a basketball outside your window... you
If
can
you're
tell
of a
them-
certain age, you can, and if you're not, you can't.
Yeah.
It's kind of a touchy deal. I understand,
Well,
you know.
But the curfew, well, first of all, was created, eons ago for a reason, and I think that there's still a good reason to have a curfew and a mechanism to keep certain people off the street.
Well, we can look into it
Yes.
and see what other policies are, other places, and what their age brackets are and what they do.
Their success rate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's a very simple thing, really, and we can incorporate that into our ticket writer program, and it wouldn't be a big deal, so.
Okay.
But mom and dad would have to go to court though, with the
Oh, yeah.
scofflaw, so.
Happy parents.
Yes.
Okay, any questions?
Thank you.
That's it, Dave.
Yes, can I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
Sport.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried.